traditional way of passing on stories and messages when you go visiting. And today, to some extent, because I don't know everyone that's in the room, is a bit of an opportunity to go visiting and tell a little story about what's been happening in education over the last few years, and maybe to prophesise a little bit about what might happen into the future. I called this presentation From Bricks to Clicks a revolution, because I do believe that we are right now in a revolution in education. And by looking back a little bit and looking forward a little bit, I hope to explore something about that revolution with you today. So can I ask first of all, and I promise I'm not, actually don't have my phone in my hand, so I'm not going to take a picture of you and launch it on TwitPics or something, so you might think you look a bit silly. If I could get everybody to close their eyes and just imagine for me your classroom in your last year of school, your main classroom in your last year of school. And just think for a minute about what that might look like. And you might even like to use your hands to sort of draw the space of what the room looked like. Okay, so if you all do that for me, just close your eyes and try to put yourself back in time, back into your classroom, that last classroom. Okay, you can see it nice and clearly now, I'm sure, in your subconscious mind. I'm willing to bet that at the front of the room there would have been some space where you could record notes. So it might have been a blackboard. Those people who are younger in the audience, it might have been a whiteboard. And for those people even younger in the audience, maybe a really early interactive whiteboard or some sort of digital board. Is that true? Show of hands. Blackboard at the front of the room. I'm guessing some tables and chairs, mostly probably desks in rows or some version of rows, maybe a horseshoe or something, again depending a little bit on your age group. So that's pretty much what education, to some extent in our subconscious mind, looks like for many of us. We imagine that. We imagine a person like myself out the front in the role of teacher leader, you know, sharing knowledge or imparting knowledge with people. And that's part of one of the revolutions that the internet has brought to classrooms, because that ain't true anymore. It's not quite how education might physically in the bricks environment still look a little bit like that, but in that environment of the interaction between the student and the teacher, that's what's changed enormously with the advent of the internet. Because suddenly, you can't really be the sage on the stage, because at the click, literally, of a mouse, far more sage people are available for an answer. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, I'm supposed to do that myself, probably. Note to self. So, a little bit of context. Do you know, I paraphrased the Did You Know presentation from a while ago, you might remember on the internet. Western New South Wales is currently an organisational entity for school education for public schools. And there are 10 such organisational entities across the state. Western New South Wales is the big orange part of that map. It's 385,000 square kilometres. That's, you know, more or less the size of Germany. It's a fraction bigger than Germany. And in that vast space, we have 193 schools, just under 40,000 kids, and it turns out there's only a kid every 7.2 square kilometres. That just tickles my fancy as a bit of a weird thing. And there's the stats for the state. Now, across that vast geographic area over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had the intersection of 4 really critical things, particularly for Western New South Wales, but across the state. The first of those is actually the Connected Classrooms program, which completed in December, the year before last now, actually finished installations. So what that program did is it put video conferencing and interactive whiteboard capability, as Matthew referred to, into every single school, public school in New South Wales. When we started that project, we had 400 video conference endpoints, and about half of those were actually in corporate locations, and the rest were in schools, predominantly in this part of the world. Then, a couple of years ago, with the federal government, we had the digital education revolution. What that translated to for public school kids is that every child from year 9 through to year 12, as of this year, has been issued their own one-to-one laptop device. We have, over the last 4 years, taken the intersection particularly of that Connected Classrooms program and that digital education revolution and an approach to training of teachers in Western New South Wales to create a program called Excel, which Matthew also kindly referred to in his introduction, which is a real revolution, ladies and gentlemen. It's a way of delivering talented and gifted education to the most talented and gifted kids we have in Western New South Wales, from Lithgow to Broken Hill, basically virtually. These kids get to stay at home, they get to stay in their home community, they get to be part of their bricks and mortar school, but they undertake study in English, maths and science in the clicks variety, not in the bricks variety. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about what the DER actually has been and what it has meant, but the key things to remember with this is that this is the program that delivers wireless connectivity to all of our schools and a standard to be able to do wireless across every school, including primary schools. It's given us some inbuilt technology support in schools, and I agree with some of our earlier speakers about the fact that as your maturity develops in terms of ICT, you can start to find and solve problems. But when you're in an early part of an implementation with a big group, you have to have good ICT support, and this is particularly true in education in my experience, because when you've got 30 adolescents in front of you, I can tell you, as a matter of course, that you really don't want them to stuff up. And teachers, by and large, will let the stuff up happen once and they'll blame themselves because they say, oh, I'm not very good with the IT. It'll happen a second time and they'll blame the IT department or the thing itself, and chances are they'll never try it a third time. Now, the never trying it a third time has a huge consequence for our kids. The other thing that this program gave us was a common software platform, a way of having interconnectivity between every single school seamlessly, without having to have all those problems of, different file types and different saving methodologies and different organisers. So that's been another absolutely massive change for us that's been important in that evolutionary journey. The Connected Classrooms program kicked off really in this part of the state. I don't think we celebrate enough here in Dubbo. Dubbo was the first community across New South Wales where 95% of every general learning space had an internet-connected interactive whiteboard in classrooms. First place in New South Wales. Beat the metropolitan centres by a country mile. We had the first use of video conferencing to develop and deliver educational services for rural and remote and regional kids in the Western Access programs that have been supported for years through distance and rural technologies. And the main technical support office for that, again, is based here in Dubbo, in Wingewarra Street, with a guy called Dave Foley, who's done extraordinary work in this area for years. So my involvement in this program really came about because I've worked with this team of people who'd been delivering this stuff, into towns like Tranmere, Tullamore, Tottenham, Peak Hill and so on for years, allowing all of those kids in those small, rural and isolated schools where there's potentially only between 5 and say 20 kids doing the HSC, to get together to have 100 kids to get the curriculum options that 100 kids gives you, as opposed to the curriculum options 5 or 6 kids give you. The Connected Classrooms program also delivered for us our first cross-system blogging tool. And for teachers, blogging is a really fantastic way to publish kids' work and to have kids to interact together. And the other thing that CCP gave us was a fairly significant network upgrade right across our system. We started with most of our schools on 2 megabit connections and finished with them well and truly beyond that. And we also fixed the issue with a lot of support of our satellite sites for VC. I'd just like to show you a little video clip now that gives you the sort of history in a nutshell of this program, and it gives you some insight to actually see some classrooms and see some teachers working and some of the ways in which the CCP technologies have been used. We put this together originally to show the teachers right across New South Wales what it would be like, because when we started, thousands and thousands of teachers didn't have any idea what this technology could do. I apologise to the guys in Burke and Mudgee. I'm not quite sure how well this will stream, but bear with us. Okay, Maestro? We're getting technological assistance from further afield. Oh, no, not the next slide. No, back one. If they just hover the mouse over the ones and twos, the zeros and ones rather, that's it. We hit play, it should work, I'm hoping. It's always good when the IT works, isn't it? Click. we go. It's not going to work. What you would have seen is it would have started off, I'll give you a pot of history, I've watched it more than once or twice. It would have started off with some kids actually interacting with the Australian astronaut Andy Thomas at the Kennedy Space Centre. So kids here in country New South Wales actually asking Andy Thomas questions about his experiences as an astronaut. Then you would have went up to the Great Barrier Reef and you would have been swimming around with a diver in the largest fully enclosed coral reef tank in the world. And you would have heard kids in Western Sydney ask the diver in the tank to swim over and pick up some different pieces of coral, and him asking them questions about why the coral was created. And then you would have seen a really lovely sequence with kids from Cootamundra and Wagga rehearsing for School Spectacular. School Spectacular is held each year in the Entertainment Centre in Sydney, and it's a big celebration of the cultural arts from Public Schools New South Wales. And you would have seen some kids who were part of the dance program a couple of years ago at School Spec. They rehearsed via video conference with other kids right around the state. And in fact, a young boy from Wagga that year who's featured in the video, he gave a solo performance for about 7 minutes at School Spec, and he never rehearsed once with the dance troupe until he got to Sydney the day before School Spec actually happens. Then you would have seen a group of high school certificate kids working in 3 or 4 different schools, working on a 2-unit economics program together. Each of their schools couldn't sustain 2-unit economics because they didn't have sufficient students, and so they've used the technology to pull together to do that. So really the thrust of the video is saying this is a way in which we can get cultural experts, historical experts, etc., into the classrooms to interact directly with kids in a very real way. Now, what has happened as a result of that video and the implementation of all of that equipment across schools is huge demand, as you can imagine, for those kinds of services and for content. The New South Wales Department of Education and Communities is a voracious eater of content, and there is an enormous market out there for clever people who are so inclined to get their organisation or their expertise into schools. And one of the ways in which we support this is through this program, Connections. So Connections now for our schools is an interactive website where they can literally book virtual excursions or virtual connectivity events that they might like to actually participate in. So if you want to do that trip to NASA or the trip to the Great Barrier Reef, or during book week you want to intersect with a local author like Libby Gleeson, who now lives in Sydney, you can do that through the Connections program. You can book your excursion and organise arrangements for your kids in your school. So that's just a little sort of snapshot of how Connections supports, and again, it's right here in Dubbo, right now, down there in Wingewarra Street. The guys that make all that happen and monitor all that and support it are here in Distance and Rural Ed. In 2010, now that we had that DER, that one-to-one laptop facility, and that we had that connected classroom program with that sort of level of available interconnectivity between all of our schools, we took the opportunity when the government of the day announced an expansion of selective high school placements in the state to open Excel, which is our virtual selective provision for our kids. You enter this in the same way you would enter James Roos Agricultural High School, which is probably the most prestigious school in New South Wales. It always tops the pops each year in the high school certificate. You undertake when you're in primary